Do we have to go through the history?
We can do virtually anything you want to do.
Let's talk about something else.
What would you like to talk about?
Oh, I see. Well, let's, maybe we should go through the history.
No,
There's a certain kind of tension that only exists between great artists. The kind of tension that doesn't show up as a fist fight or a headline, but instead hides inside melodies, metaphors, and carefully sharpened lyrics. And in the mid-1960s, when folk music was reinventing itself and the rules were being rewritten every night in New York clubs, two of the most ambitious young musicians in the scene, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, found themselves staring up at a mountain named Bob Dylan. And for a moment, just one moment, they decided to take a shot at him.
Let's see, Paul was the neighbor 3 blocks away, whom I met in the 6th grade, so we were 11. And I think we were singing right in the beginning, because shortly after that came Alan Freed's rock and roll radio show, and we were all ears for that and somewhat competitive, so it must have been like 1954 that we were starting to harmonize.
Not in an interview, not backstage, but in a song. That song was a simple desultory philippic, a title so chaotic and tongue-in-cheek that it already felt like a dare, and buried beneath its swirls of organ, punchy electric guitar, and rambling freeform lyrics was something nobody expected from Simon and Garfunkel. A parody, a jab, a musical smirk aimed squarely at the man who was, by that point, already becoming a myth.
Certain amount of competitiveness that's, dealt into the equation by comparisons, and that's unhealthy. It's not good for friendship.
Bob Dylan. But to understand why Simon and Garfunkel wrote a Dylan parody at all, you have to rewind to a moment that shook the entire folk community. Dylan walking on stage with an electric guitar at Newport in 1965. That single moment split the genre in half. Some people were furious, some were thrilled, and some, like Paul Simon, were caught somewhere in between, trying to understand what it meant when the soft-spoken poet of the movement suddenly plugged himself into a wall and blasted out something that felt halfway between a revelation and a betrayal.
People call, say, beware, doll, you're bound to fall. You thought they were all in you.
Dylan wasn't just going electric, he was expanding, reinventing himself, growing faster than everyone else, and you could feel the jealousy, the awe, and the confusion in the air. Simon and Garfunkel were rising too, but Dylan's growth was explosive. He was the sun in the folk rock universe. Everyone else was trying not to burn. Then came the awkward encounter. The week before Simon and Garfunkel were set to play their debut at Gerda's Folk City in Greenwich Village, the same legendary venue where Dylan had built his reputation. They crossed paths with him. It wasn't warm. It wasn't encouraging. It was, if anything, icy, guarded, almost competitive in the way only young geniuses can be. A few awkward glances, a few clipped sentences, the kind of moment you replay later in your bedroom, telling yourself it didn't actually sting as much as it did. And then came the night of the show. The lights dimmed, the room fell silent, and sitting at the bar, casually watching with a critic beside him, was Bob Dylan. For a brief moment, Simon and Garfunkel had the chance to impress the very man who hovered like a god over the entire New York folk world. Instead, halfway through the set, Dylan laughed. Not a polite laugh, not the kind you use to soften a crowd. A loud, sudden burst that sliced right through the venue. The audience froze. Simon and Garfunkel stiffened. The entire room felt secondhand embarrassment coil around their ankles like smoke. The critic later brushed it off as poor timing. Maybe it was. Or maybe Dylan remembered that chilly first meeting and decided to return the energy. Nobody knows. But Paul Simon remembered. And when Simon remembers something, it tends to turn into a song. So a few months later, he sat down and began crafting a track that did something nobody expected. It mocked Bob Dylan's entire artistic persona. He imitated Dylan's nasal drawl. He mimicked Dylan's surrealistic writing style. He packed the song full of intentionally ridiculous references, the way Dylan stuffed his songs with TS.
I am, yeah, but it's not exactly accurate to say I'm studying seriously because I was always serious about it.
Well,
I'm just directing it in a more disciplined.
Elliot and Woody Guthrie, every line bent toward a smirk. He's so unhip when you say Dylan, he thinks you're talking about Dylan Thomas, whoever he was. It didn't just mock Dylan's style, it mocked the people who worshipped him. It mocked the culture that turned Dylan into a prophet. It mocked the idea that one songwriter could become a symbol without even trying. And yet, the irony is that Simon insisted he wasn't trying to insult Dylan at all. In interviews years later, he repeated the same argument. It wasn't a diss track, it was satire. A playful experiment, an homage wrapped in humor. He admired Dylan. He respected Dylan. He just couldn't sound ironic enough to make that clear. Because unlike Dylan, whose voice could twist itself into sarcasm effortlessly, Paul Simon's voice came out clean, pure, sincere. Even when he tried to sound ironic, it sounded like he meant every word. Everything Dylan sings has two meanings, Simon admitted. He's telling you the truth and making fun of it at the same time. I can't do that. So he tried, and he failed. The parody landed flat. The sarcasm didn't read as sarcasm, and instead of the clever nudge Simon intended, it sounded like a sincere attempt to knock Dylan off the throne. But even more interesting than the song itself is what happened next. Simon and Garfunkel released the track, and Dylan didn't respond with rage or indignation. He didn't confront Simon. He didn't even write a response song, something Dylan was more than capable of doing. Instead, he laughed. He literally laughed at them during their live performance in front of a packed room. So in a strange way, the mockery ricocheted. Paul Simon may have written a parody of Dylan, but Dylan turned around and parodied the parody by doing exactly what Simon had imitated. The dismissive laugh, the unpredictable reaction, the godlike indifference. Simon's song wasn't the knockout punch he imagined. Dylan wasn't wounded. He wasn't even annoyed. He was amused. If anything, Simon accidentally confirmed Dylan's place above the competition. You can parody someone, but you can't hurt them if they're already a myth. But beneath all the satire and imitation, something else was happening, something deeper, something every great artist knows but rarely says aloud. Simon admired Dylan, he envied Dylan, and he feared him, because Dylan wasn't just talented, he was transformative. He was changing music faster than others could process it. He went from acoustic protest singer to electric poet to surrealist rock prophet in less than 3 years. Simon and Garfunkel were brilliant, but they were still playing catch up in a race Dylan didn't even seem to know he was running. A simple desultory Philippic wasn't just a parody, it was an admission, a confession stitched into humor, a way of saying, I see what you're doing, I hear you, I understand how powerful it is, and I can't escape it, so I'm going to imitate it, even if I have to make fun of it. But here's the twist, the parody itself aged like a time capsule. Today, people listen to the song and smile at how strangely accurate it is. Simon copies Dylan so well it almost circles back into authenticity again. The nasal delivery, the psychedelic references, the rambling structure, it's Dylan filtered through the mind of a man who wants to understand him but can't. And at the heart of the song is a truth both musicians probably knew. Simon was too polished to truly mimic Dylan's chaos, and Dylan was too chaotic to be threatened by Simon's polish. Yet both men needed each other, if only subconsciously. Competition creates clarity, rivalry sharpens talent, and in the firestorms of the 1960s folk scene, every major artist was secretly watching every other major artist, wondering who would change the shape of the genre next. Simon wrote a parody, Dylan laughed, and both walked away unchanged, yet more aware of each other. And maybe that's why this little song, tucked away on a 1966 album with a famously silly title, still matters today. Not because it toppled Dylan, it didn't. Not because it humiliated Simon, it didn't. But because it captured a moment where two rising icons collided for a split second, and the collision created something weird, funny, uncomfortable, and deeply human. In the end, a simple desultory Philippic became a reminder that even the greatest legends of their generation were capable of insecurity, envy, and playful spite. It showed that art isn't just about harmony, it's about friction. It's about trying to understand your rivals by imitating them, mocking them, resenting them, and admiring them all at the same time. Bob Dylan kept marching up the mountain, Paul Simon kept writing with surgical precision, and somewhere between their two worlds, one messy, one meticulous, sits a song that tried to make fun of a legend and ended up becoming a legend of its own.